Greetings once again. This is Gerald Weston giving the daily briefing from Tomorrow's World and the Living Church of God. Today I want to talk about our children in relation to the crisis that we are facing here with this coronavirus. In doing so, I'd like to go back in history just a little bit. In the 20th century, there were three pandemics. The most famous, of course, was in 1918 that killed literally millions, tens of millions worldwide. The second one was in 1957, which was the least dangerous of the three, and the third one was in 1968. I was at college in 1968, and I hardly even remember that the pandemic occurred at that time for whatever reason. It just didn't register on my radar. But I do remember the one in 1957 because I was 11 years old at the time. We were living in Sacramento, California. My father was in Morocco. He was just then being transferred to England, where we would join him later that year. But I remember my mother kept my sister and me from certain places. We didn't go to buffets. We didn't eat out in restaurants. We didn't have potlucks or go to potlucks that year because there was some sort of a flu going around that would make people very sick. And that's about all I knew of it. When you're 11 years old, you don't think too deeply about those things. You're more interested in playing with your friends in the neighborhood. But later in the year, we boarded a plane and flew to Denver, and from Denver on to New York. And from New York, we boarded a ship and took a trip across the Atlantic to Southampton in southern England, that port there, very famous port, where we met my father and took a taxi to the train station. And then went to London, transferred to another train, but we took a 4-hour trip on up to Lakenheath, where we spent the next couple of years. I remember something that took place on the train there because my father was talking to my mother about the virus that was going around. And I remember him saying to her, rather quietly, he said, "People are dying over here." That pandemic hit England pretty hard. They lost 30,000 people. And remember, back in 1957, 58, the population of the world was far less than it is today. In the United States, the toll was about 70,000 people, but 30,000 people in England was quite a toll. And I never really thought much about death before that. This was something that scared me. I was 11 or 12 years of age. I don't remember exactly the month it was, but nevertheless, it bothered me. And it scared me so much that I began to feel sick. And I got up and I went to the restroom and I threw up. I thought I had the flu, even though, of course, I did not at that point in time. I don't even remember if I ever did get the flu that year. But nevertheless, it scared me. And this reminds me of our children. They're processing what's going on in various ways. They cannot be kept entirely from what's happening. They hear news reports. They hear parents talking. Their friends may be talking about things. For some that are on Skype or on the internet in various ways, they may be hearing things from their friends. And they may be frightened by this particular virus. And it's important that we as adults assure them that really all the authorities say that for children, even if they do get sick, it'll probably be very mild. And almost no children have died from this, and that's worldwide. So they really have very little to fear from this. And we need to assure them of that. And we need to be able to talk to them about the situation in ways that are very helpful and encouraging and comforting, because their little minds are going to be working over time in their own little ways that they process it, just as mine was. And they could be frightened in a way that we don't want them to be frightened. There's no reason for them to be frightened. We have an article that's going to be coming out in the next issue of the Tomorrow's World. Mr. Mark Sandor is writing on the subject, talking about how we deal with the situation with our children. He has 4 children of his own, small children, and he's having to deal with it and is going to be giving some good pointers on what we need to do in talking with our children, how we can assure them and comfort them in this time of difficulty and trial. So I just want to pass that along to you, remind you the importance of working with the young ones and encouraging them and helping them to understand the issues of life itself. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking about vaping, another subject that has to do with perhaps young people, maybe a little bit older than 11 or 12 years of age, but that's another subject that's very important. So be sure to come back tomorrow. Until then, be safe, take care, be sure to stay close to God, and pray for one another and care for one another.